Oh, come on, y'all fired up? I can't hear you. Are you fired up? Are you fired up? All right, you're supposed to say ready to go. Fired up? Fired up? Fired up? Ready to register? All right. We got so much going on. We got so much coming together. I certainly want to thank all of you all here. We're getting ready to get our election protection part of our training together. How many of you know that we must protect the polls? All right. Y'all understand what that means? We've got to protect these polls. There are those who seek to obstruct the election. There are those who seek to obstruct the election. There are those who are trying to make it harder for you to vote. And so what they're going to be doing is they're going to be in line. They're going to be at the polling stations. They're going to be intimidating folks. Huh? They're going to be calling the police. They're going to be doing all of the different types of things that they can do to, one, make the lines longer, and two, make people leave. So we must fight against this. We must organize and strategize against this. And so we have our trainer here, all the way from Washington, D.C. She is a good sister who has been a part of this, whom I've known for such a very long time. She has been certainly active in the work of protecting elections and voting for as long as I can remember. She's somewhere around here. I can't see her right now. But I'm guessing she's on her way in, so we want you to hold tight as we get ready to prepare for our portion of this campaign that is considered, portion of this training that is considered our election protection portion. All right. And so I want to introduce to you, we're just trying to get the nuts and bolts of this PowerPoint together. Did they get it together, Tonya? No power yet? No? All right. Okay. So we want to, as we are in preparation, what we'd like to do is we'd like to get those, hope all of you all had the opportunity to sign up and make sure that you signed in as you came in here so that we could put your name in the database. Yes, yeah. That you had to sign up, had time to sign up as we walked in so that we can put you inside of the database and we can have you together and ready to go when it's time for us to get to the polls. Amen? Amen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my sister Tonya Clayhouse to come and just give her your intro. And we're gonna get you up and running by the time you get done. I want you to give Tonya Clayhouse a hand. Give her a hand from the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. Come on, give her a hand. Go all around the country. She goes all around the country doing these trainings, and she's been doing them for as long as I can remember. She's much, much older than I know. No, but she's definitely been a friend, and we've been a part of working in this movement since the beginning. So give Tonya a hand.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you all here, and thank you so much for coming out today. You know, it is a pleasure, and it's good to see people who are motivated enough to come out on a Saturday morning to learn about what it is that we need to do in order to protect this fundamental right that we all have. You know,
Tonya?
All right. Can you hear me?
Aim that a little bit more to you.
This way? That way? That way? Can you hear me now? Okay. So, it's good to see you all here. As I said, we are in a battle. And I'm here representing the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. I am the policy director, the public policy director of this historic organization. The Lawyers Committee is an organization, if you're not familiar with us, we were founded actually by the late John F. Kennedy. And we were founded back in 1963 as an organization that was committed to protecting this nation's civil rights laws, as well as eliminating racial discrimination, particularly for African Americans. And President John F. Kennedy brought all the major attorneys, major partners across the country together in the Oval Office in 1963 at the height of the Civil Rights Movement and said, you are now the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. And so our mandate, our mission is to go across the country and to make sure that we are maintaining those civil rights laws that we all fervently fought for, and to ensure that our law firms, we're garnering the resources of the law firms across the country to help assist in that effort. And so we do a variety of things. We work on voting rights issues, but we also work on housing discrimination. We know about what's happening here in the Detroit area. We understand we've got a whole project committed to eliminating this foreclosure crisis, to getting to those loan scammers that are depriving our communities, that are forcing people into foreclosures. In fact, we have actually launched a number of lawsuits that have actually enabled us to recover funding for homeowners. And we have launched lawsuits that have gotten to a total of $70 million of trying to stop these loan scammers across the country. We also work on educational reform. We work on community development. We work on racial profiling. The major civil rights issues that you're talking about, that's what we work on. But I'm here today to talk to you about voting rights, because we are in the fight. You know, all of us talk about, we remember what happened in 2008. We understand how energized and mobilized everybody was. It was the first black president, potential president who was running. We were all so engaged. And then 2010 came along. And people didn't show. They didn't come to the polling place. So as a result, we had a change. We had a change in our state legislature. We had a change in our governorship. And as a result of that, people who stood by and didn't vote, all of a sudden we see ourselves now facing all these massive campaigns to restrict the ballot and to restrict our rights. All these voter suppression laws. That is what we're facing now in 2012. And so I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about that issue. You all should be getting some flyers, and I want to make sure everybody had copies of, because I'm going to refer to them, but it's also something for you to take back with you. Because I don't want to just give you stuff that you just look at and then you throw away as you leave, because we don't have money like that. We ought to be throwing stuff away. So what I wanted to give to you were things that you can utilize in your community. You can make copies of, you can get them, download them on the internet, and you can pass them out. And I'm going to go through what those issues are on there. And you'll see, in particular, I'm going to highlight how to get help. If people are having problems, we've got a national hotline that is live now, even for the primaries next week. We've got resources on the web. We've got a smartphone app that I'm going to show you all how to make sure you get a hold of. Because we know that there's a digital divide in the African American communities. However, despite that digital divide, African Americans and people of color are the most prolific users of smartphones. Why? Because we can get them much more cheaply. And so that's why we made sure that we have such a smartphone app that you all can get, everybody can get access to what their rights are, to get assistance, to help them if they're having problems at the polling place beforehand, if they're registering to vote, whatever. So what I'm going to do, I think it looks like, as I see my son on the little PowerPoint, so apparently they've got it up. So what I wanted to do, because I wanted to at least give you a visualization of what was going on. What you have materials at your disposal, but I'm also going to kind of go through this PowerPoint in an effort to really give you an understanding and appreciation of what's happening across the country. Because again, my charge here today is to give you an overview of what's happening across the country, but also to talk to you about what's happening right here in Michigan. Because there's plenty that we need to be prepared for. And I'm going to tell you about it, but then I'm also going to give you some tools to combat that. Because what we need are you all on the ground. we need you to be our foot soldiers. We need you to work with the Lawyers Committee. We need you to work with the National Action Network. We need you to work with the Million Foundation. We need you to work with all of us who are part of a large coalition called Election Protection to combat all of these voter suppression tactics that are taking place. So moving to the next slide, what I wanted, let me just kind of give you an overview first. We talk about the challenges that we're all facing, and I think I heard my previous speakers talking about, the Voting Rights Act, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I think for the most part, what we've got to deal with are a lot of the state laws that we're dealing with here. There's federal laws that we've got to, that are here to protect us, but for the most part, you've got enough state laws that we've got to make sure that we're countered at this point. We're going to be facing a lot of things as a result of some of the problems or some of the recent laws that have been passed. You've got long lines, under-resourcing of the polling places. I've been here long enough to know, and I guess I should have said this from the onset. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing depending on where I am, but I'm a Michigan grad. So this is like, feels like a second home to me. I talk about going up the I-94 corridor every weekend from when I was at Michigan, because I have family here in Detroit who cooked me breakfast on Sunday, because I was poor. So I needed to make sure I got my food on Sunday morning, so I would drive up here Saturday evening after my track meet and come up here and get my Sunday morning breakfast. So I know this area well, and so I was back and forth here during the 2004 elections, during 2006. This is my neck of the woods because I understand and I know what we need to do here in Michigan. And so I dealt with these long lines back in 2004 when we were dealing with the Kerry campaign. These are in under-resourced polling places. Poll workers don't really know what to do. That was actually the first onset of the electronic voting machines, if you all remember. Yeah. And a lot of poll workers just don't know how to work them. And so we were dealing with that because that caused long lines and people didn't know how to turn them on. We had people waiting at the polling place. Confusion over the election rules and regulations. Again, I'm going to talk to you about what's going on right now. And so when people don't understand what the real rules are, they start unilaterally saying, oh, you need a voter ID when you really don't need an ID. Or you need this type of identification, or you need, or no, you're not, you need to be in this line and not that line, or you need, because you didn't fill out your registration properly, you need to check this box in order to ensure that you can vote. There are things like this that people don't fully understand. And so therefore, what ends up happening is that you have poll workers, or, and not intentionally, but sometimes they're saying, well, I'm going to make sure that you're obeying this rule that I've decided is a rule, and you, because you look like me, I'm not going to worry about that. You know what I'm talking about. So that's why we've got to make sure we're in our own communities. Voter suppression, for example, deceptive practices, which I'm going to talk about. Flyers telling people that they don't have the right to vote because they have an outstanding traffic ticket. Yes, it's real. I've got examples of those types of things. And that's the type of thing we've got to make sure that we're combating. And then outright acts of intimidation. People at the polling place challenging you, intimidating you, looking like they're officers and law enforcement, etc. And so in particular, I want to talk about True to Vote, which I think you all might be somewhat familiar with, I'm hoping. But if not, I'm going to talk about this organization that is already committed to sending millions across the country to challenge the right to vote, particularly of communities of color. That is their main purpose. Their claim is to protect the integrity of the ballot, but what that actually means is that they're going to send people out to challenge our vote at the polling place. That's right. So going to the next slide. Oh, you can keep going. I just like that picture because it's got, the first lady and everything, so we talk about the flag. All right, so these are just a few stats, just to give you a familiarity of what we're facing. 25% of African American voting age citizens lack the necessary ID that will be required to vote in many states this year across the country. 25%. Do you understand what that means? When we have elections that are determined by hundreds of votes, maybe 1,000, that 25%, 5.5 million, that is the election. And if these people don't have the necessary ID, then people are going to be disenfranchised, and we're not going to be able to put in office the people that we wanted to put in office. that undermines the democratic process for everybody, regardless of what party you are representing. As many states, 60% of the 3 million African American voters who registered for the first time in 2008, they're going to need to re-register in 2012. Did you all know that? Exactly. So that's something that we're facing. People don't realize that they thought that they were all good in 2008, but they may have moved, the laws may have changed, and now they're going to have to re-register. And if they don't know that, they're going to show up at the polling place, and it's going to be too late. Unless they have same-day registration, which only a number of states have, then they're not going to be able to vote. And so that's why it's very important that you all are here today. And then you talk to people as you get out. We've got to talk to more people. We've got to get everybody to engage in this education process. 1.8 million Black voters were needing to be registered to attain parity with the overall population of American voters. I mean, essentially that just means that African American voters, we have a high proportion of those who are going to have to be registered in comparison to non-minority voters. And so this is why, again, it's very important that we're all out there engaging. Going to the next slide. All right. What you see here is an evolution, and I'm going to explain this to you, but just keep looking at it, and you'll see how it's getting more colorful as the months go by. What this map indicates, as it gets more colorful, are the numbers of states with voter suppression laws now in the books. This is what's happened in the past year and a half, ever since 2010. Starting in 2000, in the beginning, look, October 2010, every month, it gets more colorful. You see red and blue and the yellow states. All these states now have voter suppression laws, either on the books or pending. Again, that happened right after the 2010 elections, and we put this map together so people could see what we really are facing. That we're not just trying to blow smoke, that we're serious about this. And there was a concerted effort in place, a coordinated effort in place in order to put these laws together. Now, all these red states, if you could move to the next slide, you all actually have a copy at your tables of the map of shame. And that's, we can, actually go to the next one. Well, you just leave it there, it's fine, it's fine. You have a copy of this map of shame. And that's a smaller version up there, but let me tell you what this means. So this map, you'll see on the key, all the red states are ones that have very restrictive voter identification laws. They've all passed, they're all there. 10 states. And then we have all the blue states that now also have they have restrictive identification laws in place. It may not be just photo ID, but it's ID. And then you have those states that have the yellow, where legislation is proposed. Now, for example, we know what just happened here in Michigan, very recent. There are states, we think we might be over the bubble at this point, but there are still states that have it in their legislatures that potentially could have an emergency session and move some more things forward. You've got the states that at least have V's on them. That's where the governor vetoed the law. So we could have had more red states, but for those V's. And then you have other states that have all of those scales of justice that you see. That's where we're fighting back. And we're fighting back everywhere, but we've definitely been able to stop it in the courts. The Lawyers Committee, along with the ACLU, along with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, all of us are fighting in the courts under the Voting Rights Act, because those are the states where we're able to stop these laws from being pre-cleared. And so we've got injunctions in place. But this map really, again, it just gives you an idea of what we're facing. And I would like to give this to people so you can just say, look, I'm not lying. This is really what's happening. Just give it to them. And usually what we say is like, oh my gosh, really? Like, it's a pretty map, but it's not supposed to be that pretty. I mean, it's just, it's not supposed to have all these colors on here. All right? And so this is why we've got to make sure that we tell people about what's going on. And so on this slide, what you see is that all of the red states, again, the coordinated effort that's in place, that is, those are the numbers of electoral votes that are at stake. And if you notice, these are states that have a high number of electoral votes. There's a reason that these laws were passed in those states because it's going to have an effect. It's political. And we just want to show that to you so you understand what's happening. Okay, moving to the next slide. All right, let me talk to you generally about what's going to be happening on some deception that we want to make sure that you're aware of. Deceptive practices. Again, I dealt with this back in, we really started seeing this really come about much more in 2004. Mind you, these types of practices have been in place for years. There's nothing new, other than the fact that we are now much more aware of it and able to document it. We talked about we have basically a resurgence of Jim Crow that's going on. And it's a shame, but it's the real thing. And I say that because even the Attorney General, our highest attorney in this country, has indicated that the laws that are happening right now are essentially akin to what happened in Jim Crow. Okay? So that's real. And these deceptive practices that are taking place are happening because there are not the necessary laws on the books to stop them. These are loopholes that people are finding. And so when I talk to you about, okay, traffic ticket, people sending you out flyers saying, you know, you can't vote because you have an outstanding traffic ticket, that's real. People are sending that out because there aren't the necessary laws in the books for people to stop them. There might be fraud statutes, but people are not enforcing that, okay? So those are the flyers that are going out in specific communities, and you know what communities I'm talking about. There are communities. You got flyers going out saying if you haven't paid your child custody, y'all know, child custody hasn't been paid, you can't vote. That's not true, but that is what's going on. You got people, for example, you can't read all that, I know it's small, but and some of these, particular, one of them is telling you, in Maryland, is saying, you know, that because of the great turnout, the Democrat, you know, we have, that you don't have, the Democrats, we want to make sure that everybody has the right to vote, so Democrats go vote on Wednesday, and Republicans vote on Tuesday. Come on, y'all. Now we know that is false. You all know that. But see, many people may not realize that, and this is why I'm telling you this.
That's right.
So you understand that, because there's a lot of people who are first-time voters, who are new, people who are just getting their credentials. They don't know these things. And sad to say, we're not getting the civic engagement, civic education in our schools today. Now, I'm a product of public schools, proud product of the public school system. However, I also know that I got a lot more than I believe that my son is probably going to get coming up, unless I make sure I teach him about civic education, about, you know, we all remember Schoolhouse Rock. I knew, that's how I learned in the beginning, but kids don't have it this day, even that enormous amount. So people may not realize that election is always on Tuesday, okay, of the month. It's not Wednesday. And so these are the types of flyers that are going out. We also have flyers being told that, for example, deception, telling people that certain candidates are being endorsed. By example, well-known people who are in another party. This happened in Maryland, actually. We had the national president of the NAACP who was put on a flyer for the Republican candidate, implying that he was endorsing the Republican candidate. This is what happened. And so these are the types of things that are out there. And I want to make sure that you all are familiar with this so that you know if you see a flyer like this, even if you're not sure, I need you to send that to us. I need you to call. You've got now also, one of the flyers that you have, you see this flyer? Election protection? Okay, this is how you fight back. I'll talk more about it. But you see that 1866 our vote number? If you see one of those flyers, you call us. And you get it to us immediately, because we can contact the Department of Justice, we can also get to the government, we can try to make sure that we're getting the right information out there to stop it, okay? And call us immediately. Going on to the next slide. Now I'm going to start moving through this pretty quickly, because I want to make sure, I know we got a lot going on and we're behind schedule. True to vote, so let me tell you about this, because this is what you all are going to be dealing with here in Michigan in particular. True to Vote is an organization that's actually formerly called the King Street Patriots. And they were formed back in 2010, but they go in and out. And so what their main doesn't care. We dealt with them then. But we also know this year, if you go on to the website and just type in "True to Vote," it'll talk about how their goal is to protect the integrity of the election. But what that means is that they're going to challenge people's vote. So there are certain states that have been designated, particularly those that have a high proportion of people of color. And they're going to be sending people, they're training them. And we know this because we got some people on one of the calls, undercover. And we know that this is happening. So they're going to be sending people to states like Michigan to challenge your vote. And on the other side of this page, where you see election protection, on the other side of this is a fact sheet about challenging. And I wanted to make sure you all have this because you need to know what you're facing and what the actual law is, okay? So that you can tell other people that if your right to vote has been challenged, or if you think that somebody's at the poll trying to challenge your vote, you need to know your rights. So you can always call the 866-R vote number. We can help you. We've got trained legal volunteers. And on the ground, even during the election, in the general election, we're planning on having attorneys that are roaming across the state, across at least the Detroit area and other surrounding areas. But we're going to have people here to help you. But that is because we know that the True to Vote challenges are coming. But we also know other issues are happening. So moving forward. All right, so what I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. Your current laws, we know that there was, you hear me still? Debating? Okay. The current laws here in Michigan, you all had a recent bill that was passed. We know that most of them were leaky. Okay, let me. Okay. All right. There have been some recent laws, a recent law that has been passed, and I'm going to talk to you briefly about that so you know what to do. Going to the next slide. We're working with this. I'm good. All right, so voter registration. This is what you need to know. 18 years of age, U.S. citizen, resident of your township. Students can vote. Make sure that students understand what their rights are as well. You cannot have been convicted of certain felonies unless your rights have been restored. So if you don't know, you're out here. Okay. As well as you have to make sure you're registered at least 31 days prior to the election. Okay? So we want to make sure that people understand at least the basic fundamentals of registering to vote. And I know that you guys have been discussing the registration process before I came, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. I'm going to the next slide. Oh, you can keep going. All right. Actually, keep going. All right. Here in Michigan, you do have an ID requirement. You have to show your photo ID or sign an affidavit attesting that you do not possess a photo ID. Now, you're still allowed to vote, all right? Make sure that people know that. You're still allowed to vote by a regular ballot. Do not let people tell you that you can only vote by provisional ballot. That is a problem. Provisional ballots are not guaranteed to be voted, to be counted, especially if there is a contested election. Let me be very clear. If at all possible, make sure that you vote on a regular ballot. So what that means is that you can show different forms of identification. For example, your driver's license or a personal ID issued by the state. Federal state government issued photo ID. Military ID, U.S. passport, student ID with a photo, and a tribal ID with a photo. Those are examples of types of identification you all can provide here. The reason I emphasize the problems with provisional ballots is because I know that from past experiences, many people are told that, oh, I couldn't find your name on the voter registration, on the list, the registration list. And they say, oh, that's okay, I'm just going to give you this provisional ballot. Well, unless you have verified that you were indeed at the correct polling place, which may be the reason why your name wasn't on the list in the first place, then your vote is not going to be counted. And so that's why you want to make sure that, number one, if you are having a problem, your name is not found on the voting list, check a couple of things. Check the inactive list, because you may have been, if you haven't voted in a while, or somebody hasn't voted in a while, they may have been placed on an inactive list. Michigan has that. We are quite aware of that inactive list. And not everybody knows to check that. Or you may not be at the right polling place, because your polling place, your precincts may have changed, or you may have moved and may have not realized that you're at the wrong polling place. And so, don't just assume that because provisional ballots are out there that you can use a provisional ballot and it will be counted. That is incorrect. It's very clear that under federal law, because I worked on this bill when I was, both when I was working in Congress, but also on the outside. When we passed the Help America Vote Act, which is the bill that says that you have a provisional ballot if you are not on the list, that you're supposed to be provided a provisional ballot. We know that the loophole is in there. It's put in there as a compromise for the Republicans at that time to say that the state can determine exactly whether or not that provisional ballot will be counted. And so, if you're not at the right polling place or precinct, it's not going to be counted. So just know that. Going to the next slide. Keep going to the next slide. All right, let me talk a little bit about, and you also have this on the back of your sheets, of the election protection one. Again, the fact sheet talking about challenged voters. Under the new law that was passed here, SB 751, there's some issues that you all need to be aware of. It deals particularly with absentee balloting. There are ways in which someone who has requested an absentee ballot could be automatically challenged. So what is happening is that the Secretary of State, actually go to the next slide. The Secretary of State could send out notices to voters trying to verify their address. And if you receive this notice and don't return that notice back, and request an absentee ballot, your vote is going to be automatically challenged. Okay? And so what that means is that you have to not only provide additional forms of identification, but you've got to make sure that you have that identification at the polling place. Because not everybody comes to the polling place with that certain type of identification. Okay? So I just want to make sure you're aware of this new law that's been passed. Because it's very important, particularly for those of you, and for those that you know who may regularly request absentee ballots. They're elderly, over 60 years of age, may not be in the state at the time, students, whatever. If they're requesting absentee ballots, know that they've got to be very cognizant, very aware that if the Secretary of State, if they get some notice in the mailbox questioning their address, they've got to make sure they send that back. Now, here's the other tricky part. We also know that there are other groups that do this type of thing in an underhanded manner. So you've got to watch out for a notice coming from the Secretary of State, but you also got to be aware that there may be groups that are intentionally sending notices under the guise of being official to question whether or not somebody actually lives where they say they live. And if they don't get something returned back, then what they do is they collect all those names and they take them to the Secretary of State and try to automatically challenge all of those voters. Or they'll be at the polling place trying to challenge those voters. We've seen this. This is what actually True to Vote may be doing in some of these states. Or other organizations may be doing it. And that's called caging. That's a term that's called. It's called caging. It's called caging. And so what that means is that people are intentionally trying to question people's residency in the states. And doing so, if they don't send back that information, then they're going to claim that, oh, they don't actually live there, so therefore they're not qualified to vote in that jurisdiction where they reside.
How can these people be legally allowed to go to we don't have police there, we're like the police, they would be the main ones that they're...
Well, the question is, how can people be legally allowed to challenge a vote?
I mean, with their papers.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, in Michigan, you have a very liberal challenge law. So in fact, anybody can actually challenge a voter at the polling place here in Michigan. We discovered that back in 2004. Now, there are requirements. You're supposed to technically have some familiarity with that person you're challenging. But you have liberal laws, and so people can go to the polling place and try to claim these types of challenges in Michigan. It's legal. But what we're saying is that if we're finding that these automatic challenges are taking place and they have no real evidence or basis for bringing this challenge, that's when we can come into the picture and say, okay, wait a minute. You know, there's a problem. That's when we have our attorneys also at the polling place and trying to help and assist voters who are being challenged. Again, what we tell everybody is don't do it on your own. If you find that there's an issue at the polling place, you're being challenged, step away, step out of the polling place, call the 866-R vote number. Just call us. And we will walk you through what needs to be done, and if necessary, we'll get an attorney down there to work with you to make sure that you get your vote.
The NAACP has trained challengers. Okay? There are people who have been trained to challenge those challenges, and they're working on that now. They do that every election. So the challengers that the NAACP trains, they're trained to challenge and watch those same people. So yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you. And so what we're going to keep going. You can go to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide?
Excuse me.
Keep going through those.
Is that on the voting day, like you go in there and make it?
Well, the question is it just on election day? Actually, sometimes they will attempt to do this before election day because they'll automatically, for example, and I don't know whether or not they'll do it here in Michigan just because you have such a liberal challenge law, they'll just do it on election day. And it's easier to stop somebody from being able to vote on election day versus essentially doing it before the election. But in other states, what we have seen is that they've sent these lists to secretaries of states to say, well, we're challenging these thousands of voters. And we've had to actually go into court and stop this. For example, in Ohio, this was huge back in 2004, I believe, and also 2006. We were dealing with these types of issues. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to tell you, make sure you understand how to fight back. I've talked to you about the 866-R vote number. Again, what this Election Protection Coalition is, it's a coalition comprised, as I said, of the Lawyers Committee, the ACLU, the NAACP, National Action Network, all the major civil rights organizations you can think of are part of election protection. We were galvanized in 2000 after that debacle that we all know happened. Regardless of who you voted for, it was a mess because people's rights were undermined. So therefore, we came together and said, you know what, we've got to make sure that we train people, just like you were saying. We've got to make sure that we've got to train our own people to be at the polling place and to protect voters because the government is not doing all that it can be doing or should be doing to help protect the vote. Keep moving forward. And so what we do, as I said, it's a nonpartisan coalition. And that's why I want to make sure that you all understand this isn't about who you vote for. This is not about who you vote for. This is about ensuring that whoever you want to vote for, you're able to do that and cast that ballot free and unencumbered. So we respond to threats. We also have programs to protect the vote. And we have long-term campaigns. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, so the 866-R number, remember that. It's live now. You can call it, well, it's the weekend, so what we'll probably do right now on the weekend is we'll be returning your calls immediately. However, during the week, 9 to 5 is live, and especially all day on the primary. As we get closer to the election, it'll be live regardless of whether it's the weekend or regardless of the timing. We're going to have people answer the phone. We have resources and materials here to help you, stuff that I've given you right now, but also things of how to help people get their ID. I've talked about ID. We're going to stop trying to fight it and make sure that people don't have to keep doing this in other states, but here you got to do it. So you got to make sure that people have the ID. And so we've got reports out and ID toolkits to help you to say, okay, this is how much money it's going to cost you to get the ID, or how much money it's going to cost you to get the birth certificate, to get the free ID. Okay, because that's what's going on. So make sure you keep this number at your, in hand. Also, I mentioned the smartphone app. This is on another, you see the resources here. It's on the back of one of the other pages. You can go to the next slide. Keep going. The smartphone app is new this year. Very important. You all can take your phones right now and text our vote to 90975. And it's on here. Our vote. Text that to 90975. What it's going to do is it's going to say, welcome to election protection. We're launching the app in a week or so, and you're going to get that new app. And what that does, it tells you where your polling place is. It tells you what types of ID or information that you need to make sure that you can vote. It tells you if you're registered. It'll tell you if there are other problems that you need to be aware of. It'll tell you other people that are might be registered. I mean, this is an app that you need to use, have, and give that to everybody you know. Okay? It's free. Free. I meant to say that. It's free. You don't have to pay for this. So make sure you use that app to get help. Yes. I think they gave out everything. There should, I don't know where the extra, yeah, there should be more there. Okay. So I'm going to end this saying this. You all have, there's a lot of things that we've got resources. I've mentioned the 866-our vote number. The God ID is a report, and there are other reports out there too to make sure you know how to help people get their ID. Toolkits, etc. You can get to us on Twitter, Facebook, the web. I don't do Twitter. I know other people do Twitter. So you can get to us on Twitter. They've set it up. Facebook, our executive director is an avid Facebook person. So you can get us. We want to help you. The purpose, again, one of the main goals I have here today is to make sure you get signed up to help, okay? And I believe that we're working with also the Michigan Coalition, Michigan Collaborative here. I thought there was going to be a representative here. I don't know if they came. But what we want to do is make sure we get people signed up. So we're going to make sure we have a list of those of you who are interested in not only being poll monitors, but maybe poll workers. And, thank you. There we go. And helping us on election day. I'll come back as much as I need to specifically train to help you all to do what needs to be done. Just like NAACP was mentioning, we all work together in various efforts to make sure we've got enough people out there on the ground, okay? So that's our primary goal. So I need you all to get out there and help us protect the vote, because this is our right. I may not have been around during the Civil Rights era, but I know how fundamental it is to my right, to my protections in this society. I know what people fought for during the Civil Rights movement. I understand that but for the fact that these people fought and died, Congressman Lewis, who was our Grand Marshal for the Lawyers Committee, the fact that he almost was killed fighting for that right to vote. I know how important that is, and I'm not going to give that up. I'm not going to let somebody else tell me that I can't get to the voting place and vote and cast my ballot. I'm not going to let other people tell you that you can't get to the ballot, because you have just as much right as anybody else in this country. That's right. I want all of you to help us to get to the students. The students need to understand how important this right is. I may be that Generation X, and the other generations coming up after me, you may say that we're disillusioned, but darn it, I'm going to tell you, I'm not disillusioned, and I don't want any of you all to feel out there fighting. We need you all to help us to get out there and to educate people so they know how important this right is. So I beg of you to take this information, give it to your friends, give it to your family, give it to everybody you know, and tell them that it is a critical time. You thought 2008 was critical? You let 2012 go by, and you all don't get out to vote.